Michael Shaw lives in Santa Cruz. He's been involved for many years with trying to understand why it was that the people in local government were blocking the development of a piece of property he had. He didn't want to build on it. He didn't want to make any money on it. He wanted to take a large plot of land and turn it into a very much of a garden, a beautiful garden. And he was blocked at every turn. And as time went by and reading and studying, he finally came to realize, of course, that there is a master plan behind what's going on, and it really gets around to taking away people's rights to private property. And so he became involved. He decided to do something, and he is committing himself literally full-time now to educating people about sustainable development, about Agenda 21, and about this movement which ties in together. There is a problem, and the solution to every problem is a new series of government laws. Pass enough laws, there's no freedom. Without further ado, Michael Shaw.
Good morning, and welcome to those, especially who came from a long ways away. It's tough to be ready for a talk at this time in the morning when you live only half a mile from here. Thank God it was the night that we got an extra hour thanks to the clock. America has been swamped with a costly policy program that is increasingly being supported by our courts. This program is centered squarely upon the elimination of private property and free enterprise. It is swarming the country under the warm and fuzzy term, sustainable development. Sustainable development is the popularized expression for Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is the 1992 United Nations Rio de Janeiro Declaration on the Environment and Development. Agenda 21 is the, quote, comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally by organizations of the United Nations, governments, and major groups in every area in which humans impact on the environment. That means everything. My goal in the next minutes is to describe the origin, the general nature, and the implementation of Agenda 21 Sustainable Development, and illustrate how this comprehensive plan is transforming the American systems of government, justice, and economics. First, let me explain how I became familiar with local Agenda 21. Santa Cruz County is one of 3 communities in the country that call their sustainable development program Agenda 21. Back in the 90s, when I was on the Federal Resource Conservation District here in Santa Cruz County, I got lured into the local Agenda 21 program in the mid-90s. As a result, this document was produced, and this is the document that is guiding all public policy decisions in this county. It is called Santa Cruz County Local Agenda 21, a Sustainable Community Action Plan, Our Agenda for the 21st Century. You can see that on its cover is the emblem from the United Nations. This document and the forces behind it explain a couple of very basic things here in Santa Cruz, and I'm going to use Santa Cruz as an example, because Santa Cruz is the national leader for sustainable development policy. That doesn't mean if you don't live here you're not affected by it, because now every county in America has an Agenda 21 program. This program explains why it is that our foresters immediately to the east in the Santa Cruz Mountains, half the mountain now cannot cut a tree. Landowners sitting in the middle of forest, having bought forest property that is too thick to be healthy. Plants don't grow on the ground because the sunlight won't get there. The trees are just too thick after the initial cuttings a century ago. And now half the people have been zoned out of timber production. The reason for that is that the planners anticipate a fire and they want nothing to be in its way. Our farmlands, sitting on a rich aquifer that's filled from across the state and from our mountains where we get heavy amounts of rainfall, filled with fresh water right up to the coastline, have been imposed a water tax on the water they draw from their own wells, on the theory that, well, they're using up all the water and there'll be nothing left. Farmers do not have much time before only those who are on the government's public-private partnership lists will remain in ownership. They're fighting, not on the right thesis, but they're fighting in the courts and losing. This summer, the appellate courts in San Jose affirmed a local decision that said that their water can be taxed. Notwithstanding the fact that only 2 days before the fact that decision was entered, the California Supreme Court took a similar case from San Bernardino County and found it unconstitutional. The word now is that the San Jose courts are going to depublish that decision so it cannot be appealed and will stand. The farmers in Pajaro Valley are in deep trouble, as are the foresters in the mountains. Home builders in the urban areas of Santa Cruz, well, unless you're a private public partner like Barry Swenson, you don't build housing. For 20 years, I've attempted to build housing on 75 acres, zoned for 30 homes. Can't build one. But Barry Swenson will build stack 'em and pack 'em units in Santa Cruz. It's going to move all the way down to Watsonville along the railroad track. They're now talking about 15 and 16-story buildings in that area. Some of these buildings that have been built, for instance, in Watsonville down by the rail line, the residents are prohibited from owning a car. That begins to tie into the transportation plans here in Santa Cruz County. In 2004, the voters of Santa Cruz County turned down a multi-hundred-million-dollar bond that was to be used to build the rail line here along the coastline. A few dollars to widen the road. It was going to take them 17 years to get 3 lanes along Highway 1 here in Santa Cruz County. The voters of Santa Cruz County had some sense that something was wrong, and only 42% voted for this bond, which needed 67% to pass. So something is happening in Santa Cruz, because the same bond was on the ballot in 9 other Central California counties. $2 billion worth of that bond was on the ballot in Alameda County for purposes of building rails, bike lanes, and other sustainable development transportation models. There was $100 million to study the widening of Caldecott Tunnel, no monies to widen the tunnel. That bond passed in Alameda County. Similar bonds passed in every other Bay Area county. Sustainable development transportation models are coming to Northern California, but fortunately they were blocked here in Santa Cruz. A man named Gary Lawrence is an advisor to the United States President's Council on Sustainable Development. He was a delegate to the 1996 UN Habitat II conference, and he's a director for the Center for Sustainable Communities at the University of Washington. He's also a chief planner for the city of Seattle. And in 1998, at the United Nations meeting in London, he said the following, quote, "Participating in the United Nations planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any local official undertaking local Agenda 21. So we call our processes something else, such as comprehensive planning, used in the state of Wisconsin, growth management, the state of Oregon, or smart growth, Governor Schwarzenegger's favorite term. Today, terms like visioning, common, such as Common Ground Monterey, 2020, 2020 San Fernando Valley, 2020, you name it, there's probably 20 counties in California that use the term 2020 to describe their Agenda 21 program, or community plan are used in lieu of Agenda 21. In every county, the programs are said to be locally driven but comparisons show remarkable similarities evidencing a top-down system that conforms to Agenda 21's blueprint. The global to local scheme is facilitated with federal agents, with federal dollars, and change agents coming out of every college across the country. The sustainable goal on a global basis is the elimination of the middle class. And when you think about that statement and carry it around with you and watch what's going on across the country, in your community, in our state, you'll see a myriad of examples of how that is playing out as the middle class becomes more and more pressed in this country. It is the American middle class that is the primary target of sustainable developers around the world. At their kickoff conference in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, the Secretary General of the United Nations for the Sustainable Development Program is a man named Maurice Strong. Maurice Strong is a Canadian oil billionaire. Today he lives in Red China. He got caught up in the oil for food scandal and had to escape the West, and the only place he could find that wouldn't prosecute him was Red China. That's where he lives today. But in 1992, when addressing the attendees at the conference in Rio, he said the following, quote, "Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class," that includes everybody in this room, "that involve meat intake, use of fossil fuels, which you use to get here today, appliances, particularly refrigeration, home and work air conditioning, and get this, suburban housing are not sustainable." Well, that's why free enterprise builders can't build homes in Santa Cruz County, and why public-private partners can build these stack them and pack them units. They're going to just inundate not only Santa Cruz, but the entire Bay Area. Go over to 680 and 580 and watch how they're being built in Livermore. Just jammed together, sky high, in a way where the roads cannot handle a car for every person. There's simply too many people located in a small area, driving the force even harder to get us all out of our cars. So what is not sustainable? At that 92 convention, a 1,200-page book came out called the Biodiversity Assessment Report, and in it, what's called not sustainable includes the following. Private property. Private property is not sustainable. Golf courses and ski lodges. Irrigation is not sustainable. Now let me ask how it is that 6 billion people are going to be fed on this earth without irrigation and the irrigation of our farmland. Well, that's simple to answer. The plan is that there not be 6.3 million people on this planet. Monotheism is not sustainable. That's why there's an attack on Muslims. That's why there's an undermining of Christianity, etc. Commercial agriculture has been deemed not sustainable, and so has the family unit. After all, it takes a village to raise a child. Sustainable developers have an emblem so that they can communicate one to the other. It's called the 3 E's. It's 3 interconnected circles that represent the underlying theory behind their movement. The first of those E's is called equity. Equity means using the law to re-engineer humanity. It's about creating social and environmental justice to replace the concepts of equal justice. That includes the precautionary principle. Now, the precautionary principle, which is the official teachings of the Los Angeles City School District, say the following: you can take no action unless you can prove it will cause no harm. Now, 3 years ago, the Federal Department of Interior was here in Santa Cruz meeting with the fire chiefs and the planning department, insurance representatives. They had a great big, happy consensus meeting where they were here to impose what then would have been the first countywide habitat conservation plan in the history of the country. This plan was busted up, didn't happen, I'll explain that in a minute, but throughout the state now, beginning in Riverside and having spread all over, our habitat conservation plans that incorporate this precautionary principle. I'll give one example. Here in Santa Cruz, they had 117 bugs, plants, and animals that they were considering to be necessary for protection. One of those was the long-toed salamander. Now, the long-toed salamander, the rules under this habitat conservation plan and applying the precautionary principle were that if you owned land that had the potential of housing a long-toed salamander, an owner would be prohibited from walking on that land during the species mating season, which is the wintertime. Now, I busted the little meeting that they were having down at the Aptos fire station on that specific plan and simply asked the woman from the Federal Department of Interior how it was then that a person could manage their land. In our case, we were managing the weeds in a riparian area where this species lives, down in La Selva Beach. And the only way you could manage the weeds is to go after them in the wintertime. Once you got past winter, it was ready to go to seed, and it would be there the following year. And after making plainly evident that the progress that human beings take to improve their lot and the lots of others, including other species, was to be completely prohibited by these regulations, the lady had the decency to break into tears. Now, in Santa Cruz, the Habitat Conservation Plan little seance was completely busted up, and it did not happen here at that time. And yet, working with local public-private partners, that means business. Whenever I say that, I'm talking about certain businessmen. You can think of the man Schindler in the movie Schindler's List. There are Schindlers all over this county, all over this state, and all over this country. And I don't mean people necessarily with the good spirit of Schindler in the movie Schindler's List, but I'm talking about people who are working to the same philosophical basis. That is, they partner for their advantage in this ugly combination of business and government. The second of the three E's is economy. Well, gee, what can be wrong with that? We've got a worldwide movement focused on the economy. But you've got to remember that every word nearly that a sustainable developer uses has a new definition. And by economy, the sustainable developer means the international redistribution of America's wealth. That's CAFTA and NAFTA. And the other international trade policies. The economic dynamic behind sustainable development is happening, and happening at an increasing rate. The other part of economy has to do with the replacement of free enterprise with public-private partnership. If you're not on the government's list, you don't do business. The same system that Mussolini invented and that Hitler imposed. You say, well, Americans aren't going to accept those concepts. But we have, because the third E floats in from the top. It's called the environment. And everybody's for the environment, but by the environment, sustainable developers mean nature before man. And the examples are endless. The United States support for Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, is quite thorough. In 1992, George Bush, the first, signed an agreement in Rio de Janeiro when on the Prince Charles's yacht parked right offshore for the administrative implementation of Agenda 21. That means he needed no congressional approval. It's just an administrative implementation. So he brought it home, and he brought it into every federal cabinet agency. A year later, the new President Clinton, by executive order, again avoiding Congress, created the, quote, President's Council for Sustainable Development. Now, it was made up of every federal cabinet officer, every major environmental group in America, and a couple of business representatives. Two of those business representatives were the head of California's Pacific Gas and Electric, and the head of Enron, Ken Lay. I wonder why Ken Lay is dead today. In 1997, the counties and mayors created the Joint Center for Sustainable Communities. There is not a county in America that does not have a sustainable development program. And in 2001, the national governors endorsed smart growth. I'll explain smart growth as a part of sustainable development shortly. Just to give an overview of where the United Nations fits into this, philosophically at least. At the Habitat I conference report in 1976, the UN made its position very clear when they said that, quote, private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. Public control of land use is therefore indispensable. If you live in Santa Cruz County, you see exactly how it is in America that land use is being taken out of the control of the citizenry and put into the centralized bastion under this horrible concept of sustainable development. Sustainable development generally breaks into three categories. The first category is land use, and that's where my focus today is going to be. But the other two categories you should be aware of. The second is education. Sustainable development and No Child Left Behind are part and parcel of the same thing. If your children are in government school and in many private schools, they are being indoctrinated to the end that if the land use controls do not take the baby boomers by storm, and they have to fight this continuing into the next generation will be psychologically and educationally prepared to accept the sustainable development world vision. And the third part is called population control. There's much less written on it, but those who lead the movement, people like David Foreman or Dr. Michael Saleh, formerly at the University of California at Santa Cruz. Population control means fewer than 500 million people on the planet. That's a reduction of human population by 93%. The land use program itself is broken into two major components. The first component is called the Wildlands Project. The Wildlands Project calls for the elimination of human presence on over 50% of the American landscape, with heavily controlled activity on most of the rest of American land. This is a map prepared by Dr. Michael Kaufman, a resident of Maine and a real activist in the freedom movement. It was compiled from information that he and a handful of other guys obtained in Geneva in 1994, just before the United States Senate was ready to endorse the Biodiversity Treaty, the cornerstone of sustainable development activity. What this map tells us is the following sustainable development plan for America. The red zones are the wildlands areas. There is to be no human activity, no extraction of resources in these zones. The yellow or orange areas are the buffer zones. These are controlled and heavily regulated under public-private partnership rules. Meaning if you're not on the inside, you'll not be engaged in business, you won't be living there either. The black dots are the smart growth zones. I'll come back to that in a minute. You say, well, that's a crazy notion. This is America. We go camping in those red zones. We drive through them. Well, give consideration to the following. The dam bustings back in the 1990s, restricting our water supply. I understand that Paul Wolfowitz is now chairman of the World Bank, Bush administration executive. And the call from the World Bank is that all human beings have no more than 10 gallons of water per day per person. Americans use, on average, including the watering of our lawns, 140 gallons per day. So imagine cutting your water consumption by 93% in order to meet this dynamic. Now you begin to understand why Senators Boxer and Feinstein have shown favor toward the closing of the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir up in Yosemite, which waters all of San Francisco. After all, we don't need the water because we're not going to be allowed to use it. Think of how the forest fuel levels and the catastrophic fires have taken off over the last few years all across America. They're happening now in Southern California. I remember when I was on the Resource Conservation District, we had federal people come into our office and tell us, it's not just a let it burn policy, they would say, that we need to enliven the American wilderness. We need a make it burn policy. We need a make it burn policy. You see, you got to get the people out of these wildland areas. When the Santa Cruz Mountains burn, do you think the people are going to be allowed by the Board of Supervisors to inhabit the Santa Cruz Mountains? I don't. See, the goal is, with respect to resource extraction, is to create a crisis, because crisis leads to shortage and to consolidation. And that's where the Nature Conservancy fits in. Now, the largest landowner in the entire world, the Nature Conservancy is dead center into the implementation of sustainable development programs. The habitat set-asides, the conservation easements that landowners are being suckered into, the compliant partnering, all have to do with losing a land manager's right to control the management of their land. And at the root of all of this, the root of the Wildlands Project, is the Endangered Species Act. Our worst fears are coming true as bugs, plants, and animals are deemed more important than people. It is time to repeal the Endangered Species Act. Without its repeal, America will go down the track toward world government. I want to give a Santa Cruz example of how the Wildlands Project works. We live on the beautiful Monterey Bay Sanctuary. What is the Monterey Bay Sanctuary? This is Sunday morning. I used to go to Sunday morning when I was an altar boy. The sanctuary is a place where God was honored. Now it's a place where the paganists say our ocean is a sanctuary. But it's more interesting than that. If you go from Santa Cruz to Monterey, the 2 miles to the Monterey Bay, to the Monterey Bay, it's 26 miles across. But the Monterey Bay Federal Sanctuary runs 400 miles along the California coast. But it not only runs along the coast, it includes the land to the ridgetop on the land side of the ocean front. The entire of Santa Cruz County is part of the Bay Sanctuary. Well, what does that mean? Well, there are 25 enforcement agencies to enforce the increasing, growing rules of the Monterey Bay Sanctuary. The goal will be to take people out of the mountains, to stack people along the rail line, to get people out of their cars, to keep people from having single-family homes, one of the objectives of sustainable development. It is about creating willing sellers by battering them until they give up and supposedly, happily, convey their lands to the federal government. In Santa Cruz, we have timber rules, sanctuary rules, habitat conservation plans, which are coming in nonetheless in the San Lorenzo Valley. We have the best management practices coming out from the Resource Conservation Board and the National Resource Conservation Service. We've got water policy that's stealing our farmers' lands, thousands of red tags, which are putting people under incredible pressure. There's a fish land ordinance, which says they've not begun to implement it, but they've passed it. But the Fishland Ordinance says that in the mountains, that development is to be decommissioned if it falls within the fishland. Now, that means roads and houses are to be decommissioned. I asked the author of this one day, what does that mean? She couldn't answer it for me. She got embarrassed because she knew where I was coming from. But the reality of decommissioned is it means closing roads and tearing down houses. Now, this fishland goes from the fish stream halfway to the ridgetop. It's under one little silly ordinance that's been passed in 6 California coastal counties. They can rid the mountains as soon as they decide to enforce it. You see, when government controls human action, private property becomes eliminated. We have a tape, DVD, done by Dr. Michael Kaufman in the year 2005, where he takes the map I showed you earlier and shows how it has been implemented almost completely. The steps are in place to knock down the rest of the walls that keep it from having been implemented in its totality. The other element of the land use plan of sustainable development is called smart growth. Welcome to a smart growth community. Santa Cruz County, in deposition by the zoning administrator, was acknowledged to be being implemented by the planning department in accordance with smart growth principles. Smart growth is dense human settlements subject to increasing controls on how we live and increasing restrictions on our mobility. In a decade, you won't recognize Santa Cruz because that railroad track is going to be jammed with people. Jobs will increasingly be assigned to people, and the community will raise your child. You just put them to bed at night. No worry. When it comes to smart growth, you've got to realize that it's about a new mobility, trails and rails. It's about dense government-controlled real estate along those rail lines. It's about compliant government partners, the sustainable developers who will be doing the business. It is the end of free enterprise and of private action. Sustainable development is the end of freedom. So ask yourself the question, because innocent people fall prey to the lures of sustainable developers, is sprawl, meaning spreading out, and choice, meaning decide about yourself, where you're going to live, such a bad idea for yourself or for others? Is development of water resources so bad? Is a dam in the Santa Cruz Mountains such a horrible thing to happen? Are more lanes on our freeways really distressing? Our population's doubled. Our freeway lanes have gone up nominally. That's why we have such traffic. This gives you a picture of what sustainable development communities, smart growth communities will look like. One of the activists, smart growth activists, said, when we're done, it'll be the animals on the outside looking in. See, the idea is to put people on small islands, make them cogs in an elite's design for a new world order. Agenda 21 is being implemented through a burgeoning system of state-sponsored, here in America, state-sponsored Soviets, a system that Al Gore called the reinvention of government. Now, a state Soviet is a system of councils that report to an apex council. It implements a predetermined outcome that affects a region or a neighborhood. It's usually arranged through a process called facilitated consensus. It means you go along or you get out of the room. Members of a Soviet council are chosen by virtue of their willingness to comply with the outcome and their one-mindedness with the group. State Soviets are the operating mechanism of a government-controlled economy, whether it be socialism or public-private partnerships. Santa Cruz had gone a little quiet for a few years, beginning in 2002 through to the early part of this year with regards to its public Soviet creations. Today they're back in full force. Fred Keeley heads up a transportation commission that is pure Soviet. We've got those meetings on tape. There's a Santa Cruz City business conglomerate that is putting together the public-private partnership Soviet council system for public involvement so long as you go along. And others are in the works. It's all about marketing. And terms are important to marketeers. So here's a list of expressions. You can find some free copies of it on our table. Of words that have been redefined by sustainable developers. It's code words they use amongst themselves and lure words they use for the rest of the public. Talked about the 3 E's. Consensus is simply the process by which social scientists now have learned what they think are ways to take a room and cause a room to have no dissent. And of course, if there are dissenters, there's a way they cull them and marginalize them from the crowd. Now, there are ways of breaking up this kind of consensus. We have materials. Bev Ekman's been a leader in this field for how you and 3 other people, it was 2 of us who busted up the Habitat Conservation Plan for this county, notwithstanding that there were 50 stakeholders involved in its implementation. So it only takes a handful of people in any community to go in and derail, at least for a while. They always come back. I mean, it is a rubber ball that keeps bouncing. But you can derail it and thereby slow it down, giving us some time for the people in your community to begin to understand what sustainable development truly is. Social justice is one of their key ones. Social justice is communism. Equal justice is a different concept altogether, and that's the American concept. We need to begin to focus ourselves on those differences. Common good is, one of the old standbys from, early in the last century. Common good is communism. Regional. Everything's moving regional. Regional water, regional transportation, regional air quality. None of these people are elected. Regionalism, in the words of Charlotte Iserbyt, a leader in this movement, is communism. The man who started regionalism in California, sadly, was Ronald Reagan. We have had no relief from our leaders, left or right. They both have taken us down this spike toward sustainable development. Stakeholder. I like to describe a stakeholder as someone with a spear coming right at the heart of private property. When someone tells you they're a stakeholder in your neighborhood, meaning they can control the color of your house or other aspects of the management of your property, reject them. Point out to your neighbors and friends that a stakeholder is a communist operator. We're dealing with what I call a planned evolution. It's operated by change agents. They're increasingly getting, cocky as they begin to refer to themselves as change agents. It's true, many messes have been made of the American system. The American system isn't what's off base. It's what we've been doing. And the more we do, the worse we mess it up, the more change agents come out of the woodwork, calling for plans of action. Now, action means, in their vocabulary, Agenda 21, community teamwork in operation now. So when you see an action program, be very leery. The action change agents are seeking to transfer America from a system of self-governance to a system of global collectivism. Our system of self-governance leads to liberty, and that's based on the ideals of unalienable rights. Unalienable means it can't be taken from you. You can be squashed, you can be killed, but unalienable means it's part of you. Unalienable rights include the right to your life, your liberty, and your property. One simple expression that, when really thought through, means so much and offers us the chance for a rebound as we begin the 21st century. The global collectivism has got a firm stakehold on D.C., Sacramento, and Santa Cruz and everywhere else. Is a system that leads to tyranny by its own nature. It's based on the idea of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which incorporates the 3 E's: social equity, the new economy, and environmental justice. See, Agenda 21 is a philosophy of Comtean positivism. Auguste Comte was a philosopher in France 200 years ago who really established the framework that was picked up by political activists, Fabian socialists, 60 years later in England. And their action programs, alive today, are what is driving this worldwide movement for sustainable development. People say, oh, Fabian socialism, that died after the Second World War. Well, then how would you explain the fact that Tony Blair is the past chairman of the British Fabian Socialist Society? I want to take just 2 examples of the implementers of sustainable development. ICLEI is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. ICLEI, in its own words, is an international association of local governments implementing sustainable development. Remember, sustainable development is global to local. Remember the bumper stickers in Santa Cruz in the 1980s all over the place? Think global, act local. Well, that's what ICLEI sets communities to do. ICLEI's mission is to build and serve a worldwide movement of local governments to achieve tangible improvements in global, environmental, and sustainable development conditions through cumulative local action. Now, Comte's positivism called for Paris to be the center of the world, a world of local communities. There's nothing new here. There's just a lot that's not been spread around. Building a worldwide movement requires that ICLEI functions as a democratic international association of local governments. Now, this page is from a 1997 website. And you can see there that as far back as 10 years ago, San Francisco, San Jose, Santa Monica, and Santa Cruz County were already affiliated and associated with ICLEI. Today, ICLEI has thousands of American communities under its guidance web. They're based in Toronto, Canada. They're a United Nations NGO, non-governmental association. They have 1 U.S. office. It happens to be in Berkeley. But equally as devious for Americans is the operations of the United States Department of Agriculture. Now, I didn't pick on the Department of Agriculture out of the various federal agencies for any particular reason, because you can certainly find this information at the Department of State, the Department of Housing, the Department of Justice. But let's just look at the Department of Agriculture. Right on their webpage, they pronounce very prominently their affiliation and their allegiance to sustainable development principles. They pronounce the United Nations on their cover page. They talk about the guiding principles for USDA sustainable development. That means the elimination of private property. What farmer wants to engage himself with the Department of Agriculture when their goal is to collectivize our farms. They have a policy statement on sustainable development, and they have a USDA Council on Sustainable Development. We haven't had a president in a long time. Look what's grown in our federal government under the leadership of Democrat and Republican presidencies. Here in Santa Cruz County, I said I was on the Resource Conservation District. Back when I was on that council in the 1990s, we had a budget of $10,000, and our purpose was to give land management information, not regulation, around to landowners in Santa Cruz County. Today, the RCD funnels and functions between $5 and $10 million for the implementation of their public-private partnership rules. A lot of their money comes from the Packard Foundation. The rest of it comes from the taxpayers. It's an entirely different organization. The USDA is in every community in America doing the same thing. So we really come down to a question that we all have to ask, and that our children, teenagers especially, have to become aware of. And that is, what philosophy of rights do we live by here in the United States? You know, the world, current times, offers two political philosophies for consideration, I mean, in the main scale of things. The first is based on individual rights. Its best expression is founded in the United States Declaration of Independence. And the second, or alternative one, is the idea of community rights, what our children are being taught in schools. And it's based upon the ideals of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Well, let's contrast the purpose of government under the two documents. Under our own, the Declaration of Independence, the purpose of government is to protect the natural or unalienable rights of every person. But under the UN document, the purpose is to control the individual for the greater good of the community. If there happen to be too many of us, well, we'll simply take care of that problem. The language in the Declaration of Independence says that, quote, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And from that, all good things have flown for 200 years in America. But the Declaration of Human Rights, which I'll say interestingly, you'll find when you walk into a Santa Cruz County library, you go to the front desk and they always prominently have the Declaration of Human Rights displayed. There's no U.S. Declaration of Independence there, just the UN Declaration of Human Rights. But what's key here is the section I'm about to describe for you isn't in their copy. They know this shows the essence of the UN political dynamic, and so they simply deleted it. But in Section 29, Article 29, Section 3 of the UN document, it says, quote, rights and freedoms may be in no way exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. The average 15-year-old needs to understand the difference between unalienable rights and what it means to be contrary to the purposes and principles of a man-made organization that pretends that its leader is Kofi Annan, but who behind that black curtain sits other people. And they're the people who determine what those purposes and principles are. They're the leaders of the public-private partnership movement around the world, people like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. The United Nations is alive and well in this community. It's got a United Nations Associates membership that is very active. And when our Congressman Sam Farr comes back to California, he's been recorded on tape as saying, this is my favorite group, when talking to the United Nations Associates. In fact, Sam Farr, our congressman, is the only congressman in the history of America to fly the UN flag outside his congressional office. You see, in short, under our system, you're born with rights and government exists but for one reason, and that is to protect those rights. You and the product of your labor belong to you. But under the UN system, government grants, restricts, and withdraws your rights according to its needs. You and the product of your labor belong to the community. Now, the operation of America is coming closer and closer and closer to that latter dynamic, and it's becoming further and further away from our traditional heritage. 3 years ago, our current president, the man the public thinks doesn't get along with the United Nations, said the following to the United Nations, quote, "The United States of America is committed to the UN, and we show that commitment by working to fulfill the United Nations' stated purposes and give meaning to its ideals." Well, the good news there is that in 2 years, President Bush won't be president anymore. But the bad news is that there's no one in either party running for president who doesn't share this idea. I want to talk a little bit to describe political globalists and state capitalism. If you look in a Webster's dictionary and look up capitalism, I've always, for many years thought myself as a capitalist. But you look in the dictionary, and it tells you that capitalism was once a system of free business, but increasingly has become a system of government-private partnership. And we're certainly seeing that around the world, as this new world order isn't old-line Stalinist communism. It's a combination of Mussolini business and Lenin-Stalinist social policy. What we have today with the political globalists around the world and in this country and their state capitalist partners is an assault on land. The growth of government-business partnership and the growing war on free enterprise. And with Agenda 21, we see other issues emerging. For instance, the war on human health care, the surrender of individuality to sustainability. And over the next decade, as our medical system becomes bankrupted, we're going to see that come out in spades. We're embedding a system of comprehensive planning, Gore's reinvention of government. We're redefining Christianity toward a global religion. We're taking central control of education. We're building global citizens and human drones. Our schools have become dangerous places of thought. Political globalist trade policy is happening all over, NAFTA and CAFTA. Monetary uncertainty is looming around the corner. All this is being accelerated by our trade policy, the regionalism, and the surrender of our national sovereignty, as evidenced by the loss of our borders and the failure of our treasury for solid money policy. Liberty presumes that the government's power be strictly limited in scope and that the law be applied equally to each citizen. Freedom means that we can each act on our own authority, limited by our legal responsibility not to infringe on the equal rights of another, and the moral and social responsibility to respect the dignity of others. We raise our children with a conscience. That's why family is so important. And when a child has been nurtured with conscience, they understand how to express and how to associate in a productive way. And when we do that, we know how to trade for mutual benefit, and society improves. All that is the essence of free enterprise. Genuine peace can only exist in societies where truly voluntary and not compliant action governs civic responsibilities. And we achieve that by recognizing what individual liberty is and standing on the roots of private property in the operation of our society. That leads to prosperity and to abundance. Got just a couple of pictures to illustrate the political dynamic of contemporary times. What I call the contemporary dialectic, manufactured as it is the following. On the right, you've got a collectivist world dynamic. On the left, you've got a collectivist world dynamic. From the right comes public-private partnership, the economic engine of the New World Order. From the left, you got social justice, the context of communist justice, all overlaid with this green, warm environmental dynamic. Together, the left and the right, it takes both to create the sustainable development dynamic. We're talking about Agenda 21, which creates regionalism, which is collectivism, which delivers to us the United Nations Charter. We've got government education coming from the left and the right. We've got the fraud on the left with this environmental movement and the phony baloney stuff that Americans are just digesting without question. We've got an interventionist military policy coming from the right and increasingly being accepted by the left. Oh, they may be balking at Iraq right now, but they are real eager in the Balkans to do essentially the same thing. The police state is emerging as a result of all of that. You see, it isn't a left-right dynamic we need to be considering. It's not the attack on liberals, because the conservatives are doing their job to the same end. It is viewing the political process in an up-down dynamic that gives us some hope of delivery. Liberty on the top and sustainable development, otherwise known as tyranny, on the bottom. Our enemy isn't the liberal down the street or the conservative up the street. Our enemy is sustainable development. And people of goodwill, whether liberal or conservative, need to come together to understand that. To declare our independence, we need to recognize that liberty depends on freedom, which leads to abundance. We need to be sure that parental control of education gets started. We need a defensive military policy and a transparent government. Individual liberty, economic liberty, free association, free expression, free enterprise, and private property are the things we need to focus on. I want to thank you for being here today. I want to invite you to our table. When there, you'll find our pamphlets. We left one in everyone's folder. We've circulated tens of thousands of these around the country. The communities where it is circulating, we're seeing some strengthening of these ideals. Highlights from our series, 2.5 years on Radio Liberty at Freedom 21 Santa Cruz, are encased in this 8-hour War on Reason, which is a good cross-section, 8-hour cross-section of the issues I've talked about here today. And the stellar 6-hour DVD, Liberty or Sustainable Development, with Tom DeWeese, Michael Chapman, Beverly Eckman, myself, and Michael Kaufman, a good cross-section on the issues we've talked about here today. It is a matter of spreading this kind of information to our friends, neighbors, and relatives, because if we don't, our children are going to be living in a one-world order of sustainable development. Those who are selected for its course. Thank you for being here today, and